So I want to thank the Texas Constitution Party for inviting me to be on this program. And I welcome everybody who's watching us on the webinar. I have no idea how many people that is. I do want to invite everybody to participate with the Ruth Institute. I think the organizers should have a link where you can sign up for the Ruth Institute newsletter. And I have a few brochures that I'm going to be talking about, which I forwarded to the organizers earlier, and I'm sure they'll get them to you if you want to have them. So when I hold them up, you know, just kind of have that in your mind that we have these resources. Now, the reason I'm interested in the issue of divorce is that I believe children need their parents. All children need their parents. When you really think about it, every single person that has ever existed has come into existence because of one man and one woman. And I believe every person has a right to know their parents, to be in relationship with both of their parents. We are doing many things to undermine that relationship, that ability to be in relationship. And in fact, no-fault divorce is one of the first and most tragic things that we did to say that kids will get over it. Kids are resilient, it'll be fine. But I think that if we really think about the rights of a person, forget about politics for just a minute, just think about this from a human perspective. The relationship between your mother and father is what brought you into being as an individual, and it's the foundation for the development of the child's personality. And so we now know, after many years of divorce on demand, that children from divorced families suffer from a great many risks. They have a lot of hazards and things that they're at risk for. And here's why I think that happens, and that's in this brochure, and you can get it and see all the results of all the studies that have been done over the last 40 years. Pretty much all says kids suffer from their parents' divorces. Here's why I think that is. When children are told, when we get divorced, when people get divorced, this is what we're supposed to say. We're supposed to say, mommy and daddy don't love each other anymore, but we still love you. So we love you, but we don't love each other. Well, in the child's little mind, you know, mom and dad are both half of their identity. Mom and dad are both half of who they are. So when you say, I love you, but I don't love your dad, what you're really saying is, I love you, but I don't love half of your identity. I don't love half of who you are. And that confusing thing that you're giving kids is part of why they're upset and why they have trouble sleeping and why they do poorly in school and why they are at risk for psychological problems and so on and so forth. So it's a very serious matter for parents to separate, and we're not taking it seriously as a society. So the way I would put it to you, because I know a lot of you are very tuned in to the language of rights and responsibilities, I would say that every human being has a legitimate interest in the stability of their parents' union. That's the way I would put it. Every child has a legitimate interest in the stability of their parents' union. But children can't protect that interest. Children can't march into court and say, see here, my rights have been violated, somebody get over here and do something about it. Children can't do that. So we have to protect their rights proactively before any harm has been done to them. And look at it this way. I once had a law professor argue with me and say, oh, kids go to court all the time. We appoint guardians for children. They go to court. No, you're crazy. Kids do go to court. And what I would respond to that is, look, a child has 1 year to be a 2-year-old. They have 1 year to be a 6-year-old. They have a certain set of developmental tasks that they're supposed to get done during that period of time, right? And if their mom and dad are fighting and if things are plotting through the courts, their developmental clock is ticking while all that is going on. It's not like for an adult where we can just kind of put we have a contract dispute or something, and we can put it on the shelf and move on with our lives. That's not how it is for a child. So that's why I say children have a legitimate interest in the stability of their parents' union so that the child can do the developmental job that they have to get done, which is to become an adult and do all the growth and development and work that's required to become an adult. So that's why I believe societies have marriage. That's why societies develop the whole idea of marriage and lifelong stability and so on. Marriage is society's institution for proactively protecting the rights of children. Now, what no-fault divorce does is it says one person can end the marriage for any reason or no reason. They never have to give an account of themselves. They don't have to explain themselves. And the courts are supposed to divide the house the property and the children without particularly paying attention to the behavior of the parents, right? And so there's something fundamentally unjust about that. Not just that the marriage dissolves that shouldn't dissolve, but also the fact that that it's disruptive to the life of the child, right? So when we look at it from that perspective, that there are some rights that are being violated, that there are some legitimate interests that the state should be protecting, then you can see that that no-fault divorce is an injustice. It is an injustice. Now, we often have the vision, or the, I would call it the ideology, the kind of fantasy ideology around divorce, is that, oh, two adult, mature people have decided that they don't want to be married anymore. So why does the state have any interest at all in keeping a loveless marriage alive? Well, first of all, that scenario does not cover the vast majority of cases. So this pamphlet that is available to you, called Counting the Casualties of Sexual Revolution, inside there, we have a whole series of our estimates of people who've been harmed by the sexual revolution. And what you'll see in there is a group that we call the reluctantly divorced. The reluctantly divorced person is the person who would like to stay married, but they can't stay married because the state ends their marriage for them. Now, I want you to think about this, libertarians especially. This is a kind of contract. It's actually bigger and deeper than a contract, but marriage is, at the very least, a kind of contract, isn't it? And one party can end that contract at no cost to themselves. And in fact, the government always takes sides with the person who wants the marriage the least. Now think about that. The government is taking sides with one party in a marriage, and it's always with the person who wants the marriage the least. So if you look at it and you ask how many marriages, if you look at divorces and you ask yourself, well, what percentage of divorces are by mutual consent? Where if you ask the parties, if you ask the husband, you ask the wife, did you both want it, or did one person want it more and the other person didn't want it? You ask that question, you will find about 25% of divorcing couples will say, we both wanted it. Think about that. About 25% will say, we both wanted it. In over 70% of the cases, the couples will tell you, the other person wanted it more, I wanted it more, but most of the time, it is not by mutual consent. So since it's not by mutual consent, what that means is the state must step in to enforce this thing that one party doesn't want, which generally means separating that person from the assets, the joint assets of the marriage. The joint assets includes generally the family home and the children. And that's how the state gets involved in the details of family life, including telling perfectly fit parents how much time they can spend with their own children, and telling people, managing people's finances. You think about it, if you've never been involved in family court or known anybody who's been involved in family court, you will see that the government in that instance is more involved in people's lives than in any other area of life. We would be appalled. We would never allow the government to do the kinds of things that they do in a family court setting, you know. And so for all of those reasons, this is why the issue of divorce, unilateral divorce, is an injustice. And I'm very glad that there is a political organization that has in mind to do something about this kind of injustice that's going on. So it's unjust to the individuals, it's unjust to the children for sure, and it is also damaging to society and damaging to the country as a whole. And so I want to say just a few words about that too, because there have been some studies that have looked at what's the long-term financial impact for the taxpayers associated with family breakdown or parents who are not together. What happens to the kids? What does that mean for taxpayers? Well, we know that when mothers and fathers are not married to one another, that the children are at a higher probability of ending up on public assistance, and also higher probability of ending up needing publicly funded services such as medical care, extra help in school, psychological services. The children are also at higher risk for growing up to be involved in the criminal justice system. So you take criminal justice, meaning fatherless boys are more likely to be criminals. Okay, I mean that's just in words of simple language. That's what it comes down to. So a few people have done some estimates of that. In the United States, about 10 years ago, somebody did some calculations of the taxpayer cost of family breakdown, and what they came up with was $212 billion per year to the taxpayers. So there are serious fiscal implications attached to family breakdown, particularly divorces, which is the issue that you guys are interested in. So let me say just a couple of words about why and how, about how you might go about doing some kinds of divorce reform. First of all, I would strongly suggest that you use the language of unilateral divorce. Don't call it no-fault divorce, because people are used to that, and that just kind of flies over people's head. They're used to that as being a normal part of the landscape, and they don't see that as a bad thing. So I would suggest you refer to it as unilateral divorce, because what we really want to say is one party can end the marriage unilaterally, right, without the input of the other. And that's not normally how contracts work, right? That's not how agreements normally work, that one party ends it. So I would strongly suggest that you adopt that language wherever you can. I think it will serve you better. And I know that in the state of Texas, there has been some movement towards divorce reform. Part of that movement towards divorce reform included removing the grounds of irreconcilable differences as a grounds for divorce. And I think that's a sound thing. That's it's a good place to start. Let's put it that way. The other thing you might want to consider is the following. You might want to consider, just as a reform measure, just saying that in family court, lying in family court shall henceforth be treated as perjury. And the reason I say that is that a lot of people who've been through family court will say, we just call it liar's court, because people go in and they allege all kinds of things that they can't prove and they aren't asked to prove. And I've never heard of anybody getting in trouble for lying in family court. Now, there may be people who have gotten in trouble for lying in family court, but I've never heard of it, right? And I think it would change the character of the proceedings if you had to provide evidence for the things that you were saying, and that if you were found to perjure yourself, that you would be treated as a perjurer, right? Which is generally treated as a serious crime. So those would be some of the steps that I would recommend that you pursue as far as divorce reform. I think they're doable. And I think you could, in the process of talking about them, you could generate some support for the issue, and it would be a good, easy entry point for talking to people who maybe haven't given the issue very much thought. The other bit of terminology I would suggest to you is to talk about the group that we call the reluctantly divorced. Now, a lot of people are aware that divorce is hard on children. Actually, see, there's two different groups here that have been harmed by divorce. One is the reluctantly divorced spouse, or sometimes called the abandoned spouse, and then also the children of divorce. In both cases, those groups are kind of socially invisible, right? In both cases, the children of divorce, what we hear is, oh gosh, the kids will get over it. Kids are resilient. They'll be fine. As long as parents don't argue too much, it'll be fine. Well, adult children of divorce generally don't report that. That's not what they generally tell you. Generally, what they tell you is mom and dad went on to marry somebody else. That new person was not interested in me and my siblings. They were interested in the kids that they had together. We kind of fell out of the picture, or we were a nuisance, or we were underfoot. There were lots and lots of injustices and inequalities built into the family once a remarriage takes place. And let's be clear, what divorce does is give legal permission to contract a second marriage, right? That's what divorce, a lot of times that's why people want to get divorced, because they want the right to get married again. That new person brings with them into the family a lot of things that necessarily create inequalities and injustices inside that original family. So do talk about the impact of divorce on children and tell them that that's part of what you're interested in. And the other thing is to talk about the issue of reluctantly divorced spouses. Now, I know that a lot of people who've been through the family courts want to talk about how the courts are unjust and how the courts are biased and different things like that. And I'm not going to argue with you. If you had those things happen to you, I'm not going to tell you it didn't happen. But I don't think those issues necessarily generate as much sympathy with the average person who hasn't been through it, right? And you probably already tried this, talking to people about it, and they're like, they don't want to hear about it, right? So I would suggest bringing up just the concept of the reluctantly divorced person, and that as soon as you say that, and you explain reluctantly divorced person is the one who wants to stay married, but the government won't let them stay married. Now, as soon as you say that, everybody knows somebody that's happened to. That's what I find when I'm talking to a group, a live audience. As soon as I get that explanation about halfway done, people are nodding in agreement. They all know somebody that's happened to. And so now you're generating some sympathy. Oh yeah, my buddy Todd had that happen to. Oh yeah, my friend Martha, her husband left her. And you know, see, and so now instead of going into the details of what happened to you in family court, which they maybe can't identify with or don't know anything about, they can see that, hey, the government broke up a marriage for no reason. They had no reasons. They didn't have to have any reasons. Now you're getting to what I think is the deeper issue anyhow. And I also think it will make it easier for people to sympathize with you and be willing to listen to what you have to say next and collaborate with you and so on and so forth. So that's briefly what I have to say about it. The Ruth Institute, in addition to these pamphlets, I'm sure you guys can all get electronic versions of these pamphlets from the organizers of this conference. They'll send them along to you. And you can buy additional copies if you want from our website, ruthinstitute.org. We also have 2 books that might interest you. And I don't have them to hold up for you, I'm sorry. But we have a book that's called Marriage and Equality, which is about 70 pages, and you can read it in about an hour. And it just goes through all the different ways that children of divorce are treated differently from children of continuously married parents. And it's very eye-opening. This is written by a colleague of mine who was herself a child of divorce. Her mom remarried once, her dad remarried twice. And she just goes through step by step, logically, here's what the child of continuously married parents has. Here's what children of divorced and multiply remarried parents have. And there's a lot of inequalities and injustice. So I would recommend that book to you. Again, you can get it at ruthinstitute.org. There's another book out called Primal Loss. And that is a compilation of stories from adult children of divorce responding to a series of questions. That is a little bit fatter, thicker book, and it's a very tough read. It's a very heartbreaking read to hear what these adults have to say about what it was like for them when their parents got divorced. And again, you can get that through. I did not write that. We didn't write that at the Ruth Institute, but we sell it at our store. So if that interests you, you can get that. If you have people in your life who are on the fence about the issue of divorce reform, either of those books could be useful resources to give them. Either of those books could be useful resources to give your pastor. You know, if you have a pastor and you're trying to get them to be a little bit more biblical about the subject of marriage and divorce and remarriage, those books, I think, could be useful in that context as well. So Dustin and Christy, thank you for having me on.
If no-fault divorce is eliminated here in Texas by the legislature, signed by the governor, what would you recommend in its place?
Well, if I understand what you guys have in mind correctly, and I may not, what's the proposal is to remove one grounds for divorce. So one grounds right now is, I think it's called irreconcilable differences. So that'll go away. So you can still get a divorce for cause. You can get divorced for adultery or abuse or abandonment or those kinds of things that are also already part of the law. So that would all go along as it always has, right? But you'd have to allege or prove some of those grounds. You know, there'd be specific grounds that you would have to show. And so that's what would be left if you removed irreconcilable differences. That's what I believe that's how it would work. So if you did that and you took away and you actually had penalties for perjury in family court, you'd now have a system that was more based on evidence and would be more connected to the reality of what had actually happened in the marriage, rather than, who rushes to the courthouse first, or who has the meanest lawyer, or, or who's willing to tell the biggest whopper, and who has the smallest conscience, and is willing to tell the biggest whopper. It would change the character of all the proceedings, I think, if you did both of those things.
That is tremendous. We had a question on Facebook.
Okay.
They want to know if you have a Facebook page.
I personally have a Facebook page that you can like me. You can become my friend. You can and tell me that you saw me here, and I'll be inclined to be friends with you, unless you look really obviously strange or something. But the Ruth Institute has a page also. Okay, so there's a Ruth Institute Facebook page, and you can go there and like that page and follow us on that page. So that would be wonderful if people would do that.
Okay. Can you give them, I know it's the Ruth Institute. Do you want them to also contact you?
Yes.
By your personal Facebook page?
Yeah, well, you can try to do that. The other thing to do is go to ruthinstitute.org, and we have a newsletter, a weekly newsletter that comes out, which you can sign up for. I think if you type in ruthnewsletter.org, it'll take you right to the correct page. Otherwise, just go to ruthinstitute.org. You'll see some of the other programs that we have available. We have a program called Healing Family Breakdown, which is a workshop. That's a half-day workshop that we bring to churches and so on. And that's for anybody of any kind of family breakdown, not just divorce. We have an annual dinner that we put on. We've got a very active Facebook page. We've got a lot of things going on where you can be very well informed about all of the issues that have to do with the stability of family life. We've got marriage tips. We've got a lot of things going on over there.